You're not even her real granddaughter. That's what my sister Camille said to me, standing in our grandmother's pristine Victorian parlor, her manicured fingers wrapped around a crystal wine glass like she owned the place. Not, I'm sorry for your loss. Not, thank you for caring for Nana Rosalind for 3 years. Just that venomous declaration after I'd spent every weekend for 36 months driving 2 hours each way to Willowbrook Manor, feeding her soup when her hands shook too much to hold the spoon, reading her romance novels when her eyes grew dim, and holding her hand through every doctor's appointment while Camille lived her glamorous life in downtown Crescentville. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Hi, my name is Delphine. I'm 29 years old, and if you think this story ends with me quietly accepting my place as the family disappointment, buckle up, because what happened next revealed family secrets that went back 40 years and changed everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and blood. I've always been the responsible one, the caretaker, the granddaughter who showed up. While Camille was jet-setting with her hedge fund boyfriend, posting Instagram stories from Michelin-starred restaurants, I was the one who noticed when Nana Rosalind stopped answering her phone for 2 days straight. I was the one who found her fallen in her garden, dirt under her fingernails from trying to tend to her beloved roses, even as her arthritis made every movement agony. For 3 years, I rearranged my entire life around her needs. I changed my work schedule at the Millfield Public Library, turned down dates, canceled vacations, all so she wouldn't have to face the decline alone. My tiny apartment in Riverside became a second home to medical equipment I borrowed for her. My savings account dwindled from $23,000 to $3,000 because I kept covering the gaps her insurance wouldn't touch. The special dietary supplements, the weekly house cleaning service, the upgraded physical therapy sessions. Camille? She visited exactly 4 times in 3 years. Always announced, always with expensive gifts that looked generous but required no time or sacrifice. A silk scarf from Paris, artisanal chocolates from Switzerland, a luxury spa certificate she knew Nana could never use. Each visit lasted exactly 2 hours, timed perfectly for the photo opportunities she'd post with captions like, "Quality time with my favorite lady," and "Family is everything." But she was the favorite, had always been the favorite. The successful one with the corner office at Meridian Financial, the one who married well, the one who remembered birthdays with extravagant gestures rather than daily presents. When family friends asked about us, Nana Rosalind's face would light up talking about Camille's latest promotion, her new townhouse in the historic district, her charity galas and society connections. Me? I was dependable Delphine, the quiet one, the one who would figure things out eventually. Even at 29, I was still treated like I was finding myself, while Camille had clearly found everything worth finding. The funeral was a production. Camille flew in from her business trip to Singapore, draped in designer black, accepting condolences like she was the widow instead of the granddaughter who'd seen Nana Rosalind exactly once in the past 8 months. She'd hired the most expensive funeral home in Willowbrook, arranged for white lilies that cost more than my monthly rent, and somehow positioned herself as the grief-stricken primary mourner. I stood in the back during the service, watching distant relatives and family friends approach her with sympathy, while I remained largely invisible. The same relatives who'd called me when they couldn't reach Nana Rosalind, who'd asked me for updates on her condition, now treated me like helpful hired help, rather than family. After the burial, everyone gathered back at Willowbrook Manor for the reception. The house felt too big and too quiet without Nana's gentle humming in the kitchen or the sound of her afternoon talk shows. Camille moved through the rooms like she was already measuring for renovations, accepting praise for the beautiful service, the touching eulogy, the perfect catering spread. That's when she cornered me in the parlor, away from the other mourners. Her voice was low, but sharp, cutting through my grief like broken glass. "You know you think you were special to her," she said, swirling the wine in her crystal glass. "But let's be realistic here, Delphine. I'm the one she was actually proud of. I'm the one who made something of myself. You were just convenient, available, a placeholder until the real family could handle things." I felt something crack inside my chest, but I kept my voice steady. I loved her.
Of course you did. But love doesn't equal inheritance. Some of us earned our place in this family through achievement, not through playing nursemaid. She gestured around the elegant room with its antique furniture and oil paintings. This house, the investments, the jewelry collection, it all goes to family who actually matter. You'll be fine. You're used to getting by on less. I didn't argue, didn't defend myself, didn't point out that she'd been too busy mattering to hold Nana Rosalind's hand during her final moments. I just walked away, out of that parlor, out of that house, out of what I thought was my place in the family story.
But 3 days later, I got a phone call that would change everything. A voice I'd never heard before, professional and kind. Miss Delphine Ashworth? This is Jonathan Blackwell from the Evergreen Estate Management Group. We need to discuss your grandmother's will. Could you come in tomorrow morning? And you might want to bring identification. Several forms of identification. I had no idea that Camille's confidence about being the favorite was about to become the biggest miscalculation of her privileged life. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Evergreen Estate Management Group occupied the top floor of a sleek glass building in downtown Millfield, the kind of place I'd never had reason to visit before. Jonathan Blackwell was exactly what you'd expect from a high-end estate attorney. Silver-haired, expensive suit, the kind of calm authority that comes from handling other people's family drama for 30 years. Ms. Ashworth, he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his mahogany desk. Thank you for coming so quickly. I have to admit, this is one of the more unusual situations I've encountered in my career. He opened a thick manila folder, and I caught a glimpse of official documents, photographs, and what looked like handwritten letters. My stomach knotted. Whatever this was, it was bigger than I had imagined. Your grandmother, Rosalind Catherine Ashworth, was very specific about how she wanted her final wishes handled. She came to see me 18 months ago, and then again 6 months ago to make some significant amendments. He pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written in Nana's delicate script. She insisted I give this to you personally before we discuss the legal documents. My hands shook as I opened it. Nana's familiar lavender stationery, her careful handwriting that had grown shakier in recent months. My dearest Delphine, if you're reading this, then Jonathan has done as I asked, and you're about to learn some truths that I should have shared with you years ago. I was a coward, sweetheart. I let fear and shame keep me from giving you what was rightfully yours, not just inheritance, but identity. The story your family tells about your origins isn't the whole truth. Your father wasn't just my son who died young. He was my eldest son. And you weren't born from some brief relationship as they've always claimed. Your mother was my daughter-in-law for 2 beautiful years before the accident took them both. Camille is my step-granddaughter through my second marriage to Harold. She's Harold's biological granddaughter from his first family. When Harold and I married, we blended our families, and I loved her as my own. But you, my darling girl, you are my actual blood. My son Thomas's daughter. The last piece of my first love, my first family. I never told you because I was protecting you from Harold's family, who made it clear they would contest anything left to outsiders. They saw you as a threat to what they considered Camille's rightful inheritance. I was weak, and I let them convince me that keeping you in the dark was kinder. But watching you care for me these past 3 years, seeing your pure heart while others calculated their future gains, I realized I had it backwards. You weren't the outsider. You were the one who truly belonged. Everything I have is yours, sweetheart. Everything. Camille will inherit from Harold's estate when the time comes. This is your birthright. Don't let them diminish your light anymore. All my love, Nana Rosalind. P.S. Check the loose brick behind the rose bushes, 3rd row from the bottom. You'll understand why I could never throw away your father's letters.
I read it twice, then a third time, my vision blurring. The room felt like it was tilting. Jonathan handed me a box of tissues and waited patiently while I composed myself. "He had DNA evidence," he said gently. "Hair samples, photographs from before your parents' accident, even hospital records from your birth that list her as your legal guardian. She was thorough, Miss Ashworth. She knew this revelation would be challenged." He spread several photographs across the desk. A young man who looked exactly like me with dark hair and green eyes. A wedding photo of him with a woman's smile I recognized from my own mirror. A hospital photo of me as a newborn, with Nana Rosalind holding me while Harold stood awkwardly to the side. "Your grandmother also left detailed records of every financial contribution you made to her care. The supplements, the cleaning service, the therapy sessions, the medical equipment. She documented everything because she said you never asked for recognition, but you deserved it." My throat was so tight I could barely speak. "Camille doesn't know?" "No one knows, except us and your grandmother's closest friend Beatrice, who served as a witness. Rosalind specifically requested that the will reading be private, with family members called individually." He checked his watch. "In fact, Camille is scheduled to be here in 2 hours. She's expecting to inherit the bulk of the estate. The house, the investment portfolio, the jewelry collection, all of it." He handed me a tissue-thin document. "This is your copy of the will. As you'll see, you inherit everything. Willowbrook Manor and its contents, the investment accounts totaling $2.3 million, the vintage jewelry collection appraised at $180,000, and a life insurance policy worth $500,000. There are also several smaller accounts and the classic car collection your grandmother kept in the garage." I stared at the numbers. I'd been surviving on library wages, counting every dollar while sitting on top of a fortune I never knew existed. "What does Camille get?"
A single item, a jewelry box that belonged to Harold's mother, worth approximately $300. It's symbolic, a connection to her actual grandfather's family line. Jonathan's expression was carefully neutral. Your grandmother was very clear about this distinction. The breaking point wasn't just learning about the inheritance. It wasn't even discovering my true parentage. It was realizing that for 29 years, I'd been made to feel like the charity case in my own family, while the real charity case lorded her imagined superiority over me. All those years of being called convenient and available, all those family gatherings where I was introduced as Delphine, she helps out with Nana. All those moments when I apologized for taking up space that was rightfully mine from the beginning. "There's one more thing," Jonathan said, pulling out a smaller envelope. "Camille has been making inquiries about selling the house. She contacted 3 different real estate agents last week, asking for market estimates. She told them she'd be inheriting it within the month and wanted to expedite a quick sale." The final crack in my heart split wide open. She hadn't even waited for Nana to be cold in the ground before treating her home like a commodity. The house where I'd spent countless afternoons reading in the garden, where I'd learned to bake in that sunny kitchen, where I'd held vigil during Nana's final days. Camille saw it as nothing more than a payday. "What happens now?" I asked. Jonathan smiled, and for the first time since I'd walked into his office, it wasn't a carefully professional expression. It was genuinely pleased. "Now, Miss Ashworth, we let the truth speak for itself. And we see what Camille does when she realizes that the family favorite was never who she thought it was." I folded the will carefully and tucked it into my purse next to Nana's letter. Outside the office windows, Millfield spread out below us like a map of possibilities I'd never dared to imagine. In 2 hours, Camille would walk into this same office expecting to claim her crown as the rightful heir. Instead, she was about to discover that the girl she'd dismissed as the convenient placeholder
was actually the only true granddaughter Rosalind Ashworth ever had. I didn't go home after leaving Jonathan's office. Instead, I drove straight to Willowbrook Manor, using the key I'd carried for 3 years but somehow felt like I was using for the first time. The house felt different now. Not like a place I was visiting, but like a place that belonged to me. Because it did. The afternoon sun streamed through the lace curtains in the living room, casting familiar patterns on the hardwood floors I'd swept countless times. But now I wasn't the helpful granddaughter tidying up. I was the owner, walking through my inheritance, seeing everything with new eyes. I found the loose brick exactly where Nana's letter said it would be, behind the rose bushes she'd tended so carefully despite her arthritis. My fingers worked it free, and inside was a weathered tin box wrapped in plastic. Inside that, dozens of letters in my father's handwriting, addressed to my dearest Rosie. Letters about his dreams, his love for my mother, his excitement about becoming a father. Photos of him working in this same garden, painting the porch swing that still hung by the front door, installing the wooden bird feeders that still dotted the oak tree. One letter was dated just 2 weeks before the accident. Rosie, little Delphine laughed for the first time today. A real laugh, not just gas like Margaret keeps insisting. She's going to be trouble, this one. She's got your stubborn chin and Mom's green eyes. I can't wait to teach her to garden like you taught me. I can't wait to read her the same stories you read to me in that big chair by the window. I sat in that same chair and cried. Not the desperate, confused tears from the lawyer's office, but something deeper. Grief for the father I'd never known, relief for finally understanding where I came from, and anger, pure, clean anger at the lies I'd been fed my entire life. My phone buzzed with a text from Camille. Emergency family meeting tonight at 7, Mom's house. Important estate matters to discuss. Don't be late. I stared at the message. She still thought she was in charge, still assumed I'd come running when summoned, still believed she had the right to call family meetings about estate matters that she assumed would benefit her. I turned my phone to silent and slipped it into my purse.
Where are you? The meeting is in an hour. This is about Nana's will. You need to be here. Don't be selfish right now, Delphine. Answer your damn phone. At exactly 7 o'clock, I poured myself a glass of Nana's good wine, my wine now, and sat on the front porch swing my father had built. The evening air was warm and the rose bushes released their sweet fragrance into the twilight. For the first time in days, maybe months, I felt completely peaceful. My phone rang. I watched Camille's name flash on the screen until it went to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. Finally, a voicemail. Delphine, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you're embarrassing yourself. We're all here waiting for you. Mom made dinner. Aunt Patricia drove down from Riverside specifically for this meeting. The least you could do is show up and hear what the lawyers told me about Nana's estate. There are decisions that need to be made, and frankly, some of them affect your future too. Don't make this about your feelings. I deleted it without listening to the end. Another buzz, a text from my mother. Camille says the estate is more complicated than expected. She's trying to protect your interests too. Please come. Protect my interests. I almost laughed out loud. I spent the evening exactly where I wanted to be. In my house, surrounded by my father's letters, learning about the family I'd actually come from. I found his high school yearbooks in the attic, discovered he'd been valedictorian and had planned to be a teacher like me. I found love letters he'd written to my mother, poems he'd composed about wanting to be a good father. By 9 o'clock, my phone had gone quiet. The family meeting was over, and presumably they'd spent 2 hours speculating about my absence and making plans for an inheritance that was never going to be theirs. I made myself dinner in my kitchen using ingredients from my pantry, then sat at my dining room table with my father's letters spread around me like a map to a life I was finally ready to claim. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of possibility,
full of truth, full of the sound of my own voice finally mattering in my own story. Let them wait. Let them wonder. Let them scramble to understand why the convenient, available granddaughter had suddenly become unavailable. Tomorrow, Camille would meet with Jonathan Blackwell expecting to inherit millions. She'd walk into that office with the same confident swagger she had in Nana's parlor, ready to claim her crown as the family winner. What she didn't know was that while she was holding emergency family meetings about estate planning, the real granddaughter was home, finally, truly home, learning about the father she'd been denied and the inheritance that had always been hers. I went to bed that night in the master bedroom of Willowbrook Manor, in the bed where my father had been born, in the house where I'd always belonged but never known I belonged. For the first time in my adult life, I fell asleep without setting an alarm, without checking my phone, without worrying about anyone else's expectations. I slept the deep, dreamless sleep of someone who had finally stopped running toward love and started recognizing the love that had been there all along. I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The panic had escalated overnight, but not for the reasons they thought. The first call came at 6:23 a.m. from my mother. "Delphine, honey, Camille is at the lawyer's office right now, and there's been some kind of mistake. She says they're claiming you're the primary beneficiary. That can't be right. Call me back immediately." The second, at 6:31 a.m., from Camille herself, her voice tight with barely controlled hysteria. "What did you do? What did you say to them? I don't know what kind of lies you've been spreading, but this is ridiculous. The lawyer is claiming Nana left you everything, and that's impossible. Call me back right now so we can straighten this out." By 7 a.m., the messages had devolved into accusations. My cousin Rachel, who I hadn't heard from in 2 years, suddenly had opinions. "Mom told me about the will situation. I always thought you were too involved with Nana's finances. Did you manipulate her while she was sick? That would be elder abuse, you know." Aunt Patricia, who'd driven down for last night's family meeting, left a voicemail that made my coffee taste bitter. "Delphine, I'm very disappointed in you. Your grandmother was vulnerable in her final months, and if you took advantage of that relationship to influence her will, that's not just morally wrong, it could be criminal. We're considering our legal options." Legal options. They were threatening to sue me for inheriting what was rightfully mine. I set the phone aside and made breakfast in my sunny kitchen, watching the morning light dance across the hardwood floors. Every few minutes, my phone would buzz with another frantic message, another accusation, another demand that I explain myself to people who never asked for explanations when I was the one showing up, the one sacrificing, the one caring. At 9 a.m., Jonathan Blackwell called. His voice was amused rather than concerned. "Miss Ashworth, I take it your family has been in touch since yesterday's revelation?" "You could say that. They think I manipulated Nana into changing her will." Yes, the classic response. I've been doing this for 30 years, and it's always the same story. The family members who did the least always assume the inheritance went to whoever did the most through manipulation rather than love. He paused. "I have some news that might interest you. After Camille left my office yesterday, she went directly to Prosperity First Bank." My stomach tightened. What did she do? "She attempted to access your grandmother's investment accounts. She presented herself as the executor of the estate and demanded immediate access to liquidate the holdings. When the bank manager explained that she wasn't listed on any of the accounts and had no legal authority, she became quite vocal." I could picture it perfectly. Camille in her designer suit, expecting her usual charm and authority to override inconvenient facts like legal documentation. The bank manager called me to verify the situation. "Apparently, your sister made quite a scene. She accused the bank of incompetence, threatened to move all the family's business elsewhere, and insisted there had been a clerical error. She said, and I quote, 'There's no way that girl could be the primary beneficiary. She doesn't even have a real job.' A real job. I'd been working at the library for 6 years, helping students with research, managing community programs, building a literacy initiative that had increased library membership by 40%. But because it wasn't finance or real estate, it wasn't real. It gets better, Jonathan continued. She then went to First National, where your grandmother had her checking and savings accounts. Same story, same scene. The branch manager there actually called security when she refused to leave after being told she had no access rights. The mental image of Camille being escorted out of a bank by security made me smile for the first time in 24 hours. But here's where it gets interesting. Word travels fast in banking circles, especially when someone makes a scene at multiple institutions in one day. I've received calls from 3 different financial advisors, 2 insurance agents, and a real estate attorney, all reporting that your sister has been contacting them claiming to be the estate executor and attempting to initiate asset liquidations. My phone buzzed with another text from Camille. Stop hiding and answer your phone. We need to fix this before it gets out of hand. Too late for that. Mr. Blackwell, what happens when someone tries to access accounts they're not authorized for? Well, that depends. If it's an honest mistake based on reasonable assumptions, usually nothing. But when someone persists after being told they have no legal standing, and especially when they do it at multiple institutions while misrepresenting their authority, he paused. Let's just say the banks keep very detailed records of these interactions. By noon, the ripple effects had spread beyond my immediate family. Mrs. Henderson from the flower shop called to tell me she'd heard Camille was contesting the will on grounds of mental incompetence. She stopped by this morning asking about the funeral arrangements, wanted to know who paid for what, whether your grandmother seemed confused in her final weeks. I told her your grandmother was sharp as a tack right up until the end, and the girl didn't seem happy to hear that. My phone rang again. This time it was Beatrice Holloway, Nana's oldest friend and the witness to her will. Delphine, dear, I just had the most interesting visit from your sister. She wanted to know if I thought Rosalind was of sound mind when she made her recent legal changes. Beatrice's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. I told her that Rosalind was more clear-headed about family dynamics than she'd ever been, that your grandmother had finally stopped pretending that obligation and love were the same thing. What did she say to that? Oh, she tried a different approach then. Asked if I knew about any undue influence you might have exerted, whether you'd ever discussed inheritance or money with Rosalind. I told her the truth, that the only time you ever mentioned money was to ask if Rosalind needed help with anything, and that you never once asked what you might inherit. The calls kept coming. Camille had apparently spent the morning on a campaign to find evidence of my supposed manipulation, visiting everyone who'd had contact with Nana in her final months. The home health aide, the physical therapist, the pharmacist, even the mailman. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Camille asking leading questions about Nana's mental state and my influence, and each person responding with stories about how much I'd been devoted, how much Nana had appreciated my care, and how clear-minded she remained until the end. Even Nana's doctor was creating a paper trail. That night, as I sat in the garden where my father had once played as a child, I realized what was happening. In her desperate attempt to prove I'd manipulated the inheritance, Camille was creating a detailed record of exactly the opposite. Every person she questioned, every institution she hassled, every professional she contacted was documenting the same thing, that I had been the loving, devoted granddaughter who never asked for anything, while she was the absent family member now scrambling to claim what was never hers.
My phone buzzed one last time. A text from my mother. Camille is hiring a lawyer. She says this isn't over. Maybe you two can work something out. Split things fairly. Split things fairly? After 29 years of being treated like the leftover, they wanted me to split my birthright with the step-granddaughter who'd called me an outsider? I turned off my phone and went inside my house, to my kitchen, to make myself dinner with my grandmother's recipe for pot roast. Outside, the roses my father had helped plant decades ago released their evening fragrance into the air. Let Camille hire lawyers. Let her make scenes at banks. Let her question every professional who'd witnessed my devotion and her absence. She was building my case for me, one frantic phone call at a time. The first domino fell on Wednesday morning when I received a call from Marcus Sterling, the real estate agent Camille had contacted about selling Willowbrook Manor. Ms. Ashworth, I'm calling because there seems to be some confusion about a property listing. Camille Beaumont contacted me last week about putting 1247 Rosewood Lane on the market. She said she'd be inheriting the property and wanted to move quickly for a cash sale. His voice was professional but cautious. However, when I ran the preliminary title search this morning, your name came up as the current owner. I gripped the phone tighter. She told you she was inheriting it? She was very specific. Said the estate was being settled within the week and she wanted the house listed immediately after probate cleared. She even had me draft marketing materials and suggested an aggressive pricing strategy for a quick turnover. He paused. She put down a $5,000 retainer for expedited services. $5,000? Money she didn't have the right to spend on a house that was never going to be hers. Mr. Sterling, I'm the legal owner of that property as of last Monday. My sister has no claim to it whatsoever. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then, oh my, this is very awkward. She seemed so certain. She had photographs of the interior, knew specific details about the property's history. I assumed she was the rightful heir. Of course she had photographs. She had taken them during her rare visits, probably already planning the sale while Nana was still alive. What happens to her retainer? Well, that's between her and our accounting department. But typically, when someone enters into a contract under false pretenses, he cleared his throat diplomatically. Let me just say this. This won't reflect well on her if she attempts to work with other agencies in the area. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Sandra Chen from Millfield Catering. I'm calling about the celebration of life event scheduled for this Saturday. The final payment of $3,200 was supposed to be processed yesterday, but the credit card was declined. When I called the number on file, a Camille Beaumont told me there were estate complications and asked me to contact you instead. I sat down hard in Nana's kitchen chair. What celebration of life event? The memorial reception for Mrs. Rosalind Ashworth, 50 guests, premium catering package, live music, floral arrangements. Miss Beaumont booked it 2 weeks ago. She said it was a family gathering to properly honor Mrs. Ashworth's memory since the funeral had been too formal. 2 weeks ago? Nana was still alive 2 weeks ago. She booked a memorial reception while my grandmother was still living? Sandra's voice became very small. She said Mrs. Ashworth was in hospice and they were planning ahead. She seemed to know exactly what she wanted, said money was no object because there would be significant estate funds available. I closed my eyes. Camille hadn't just been planning to inherit, she'd been planning the celebration of that inheritance before Nana had even died. Miss Chen, I'm going to need you to cancel that event. My sister had no authority to book it, and I won't be responsible for the charges. But we've already prepared the specialized menu items, ordered the floral arrangements, booked the musicians. Her voice cracked with stress. This represents significant investment on our part. If the event is canceled with less than 48 hours' notice, we're facing substantial losses. Another business Camille had dragged into her premature victory lap. Another professional relationship she had damaged with her assumptions. The calls kept coming throughout the day. Premium wine and spirits, where Camille had ordered $800 worth of champagne for the celebration. Hartfield musicians, where she'd booked a string quartet for $1,200. Morrison florists, where she'd commissioned elaborate arrangements totaling $600. Each conversation followed the same painful pattern. Excited vendors who had worked with someone claiming to have unlimited estate funds, now facing the reality that their client had no money and no authority to make the purchases. But the most devastating call came at 3 p.m. from Janet Walsh at Prestige Auto Sales. Miss Ashworth,
I need to discuss a rather urgent situation regarding a 1967 Mercedes convertible. A woman claiming to be the estate executor put the vehicle up for consignment sale last Friday. The car sold yesterday for $47,000, and the buyer's expecting delivery this afternoon. My heart stopped. Nana's car, the pristine vintage Mercedes that had been her pride and joy, the one that my father had helped her pick out for her 40th birthday, the one that she'd taught me to drive in the empty parking lot behind the church. She sold my grandmother's car?
She presented herself as having full authority to liquidate estate assets, said the family needed quick cash to cover funeral expenses and estate taxes. The paperwork shows her signature as the authorized representative. Janet's voice was growing more strained. But when we contacted the DMV this morning to transfer the title, they informed us that the vehicle is registered to you, not her. We can't complete the sale without the legal owner's signature. I was shaking now, not with sadness, but with pure rage. Selling the house was one thing. Houses are investments, assets. But the car was personal. It held memories. It was the vehicle where Nana had sung along to old jazz standards, where she'd told me stories about my father, where we'd driven to countless doctor appointments together. What happens to the buyer? That's the problem. He's a collector from Atlanta who drove up specifically for this purchase. He's already arranged financing, cleared his schedule for the pickup. If we can't deliver the car, we're facing a potential lawsuit for breach of contract. And the $47,000? Currently sitting in our escrow account, minus our commission, but if the sale falls through, we'll need to return the full amount to the buyer, and, she paused meaningfully, your sister will be responsible for our time, storage fees, and potential legal costs. By evening, I had a spreadsheet. Real estate retainer, $5,000. Catering, $3,200. Wine, $800. Musicians, $1,200. Flowers, $600. Car sale commission and fees if the deal collapsed, $8,500. Camille had racked up nearly $20,000 in obligations based on money she was never going to inherit. But it got worse. My mother called at 7 p.m., her voice tight with barely controlled panic. Delphine, we need to talk. Camille borrowed against her house to cover some expenses while waiting for the estate to settle. The loan was supposed to be short-term, just until the inheritance came through. Her voice cracked. It's a $75,000 home equity loan with a balloon payment due in 30 days. $75,000. She'd mortgaged her house against an inheritance that was never hers. What did she spend it on? She said she needed to cover estate taxes and legal fees. She hired some expensive probate attorney from the city, put down deposits on contractors to renovate the house for resale. Her voice broke entirely. Honey, if she can't pay back that loan, she's going to lose her house. Her actual house. The one she lives in. I sat in my kitchen, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but a kind of grim justice. For 29 years, I'd been careful with money because I'd had to be. I'd lived in a tiny apartment, driven a 10-year-old car, bought generic groceries while Camille spent freely because she'd always assumed there would be more where it came from. Now she'd bet everything on an inheritance that had never belonged to her, and the bill was coming due. My phone buzzed with a text from Camille. We need to talk, tonight. There's been a misunderstanding about Nana's will, but I know we can work this out like family should. Meet me at the house at 9. The house. She still thought of Willowbrook Manor as neutral territory, a family asset to be divided. She had no idea that she was asking to meet me at my house, that she'd be coming as a guest to property she'd already tried to sell out under me. I texted back. Come alone. It was time for Camille to learn what happened when the Bank of Delphine finally closed its doors and the interest on 29 years of taking me for granted came due all at once. Camille arrived at exactly 9 p.m. in her silver BMW. This same car she'd once told me was an investment in professional image.
She walked up the front path like she owned it, her heels clicking against the stone walkway with the confident rhythm of someone who still believed she held all the cards. I watched her from the living room window as she paused at the front door, clearly expecting me to let her in. Instead, I opened the door and stepped onto the porch, closing it firmly behind me. This was my house now, and she was no longer welcome inside without an invitation. "We can talk out here." I settled into the porch swing my father had built. Her perfectly composed mask slipped for just a moment. "Delphine, don't be ridiculous. It's getting chilly. This is a family matter. Let's go inside like civilized people." No. The simple word hung in the evening air between us. She blinked, clearly not accustomed to being told no by me about anything. "Fine," she said, perching uncomfortably on the porch railing. "Look, there's obviously been some kind of clerical error with the will. I know you were close to Nana, but let's be realistic about this. She was elderly, possibly confused in her final months. Sometimes grief makes people make promises they don't really mean to keep." I said nothing, just waited. "The point is, we can fix this without involving lawyers or making a scene. I'm prepared to offer you a very generous settlement. $20,000. Plus, you can keep some of the smaller jewelry pieces. That's more than fair compensation for the care you provided."
$20,000 out of a $2.3 million inheritance. And in exchange, you sign a document acknowledging that the will was made under duress, that Nana wasn't in her right mind when she made those changes. We probate the original will from 2018, where I inherit the bulk of the estate as intended. Her smile was bright and brittle. Everyone wins. You get a nice nest egg, and the estate goes where it legally should. Before I could respond, a car pulled into the driveway. Then another. My heart sank as I recognized my mother's Honda, followed by Aunt Patricia's station wagon. "I thought I said to come alone." Camille's smile became genuinely pleased. I brought backup. Sometimes family interventions require the whole family. My mother climbed out of her car looking exhausted, while Aunt Patricia emerged with the grim determination of someone prepared for battle. Behind them came Uncle Robert, Cousin Rachel, and even Great-Aunt Florence, who was 86 and rarely left her assisted living facility. "What is this?" I asked. "This," Camille announced, "is everyone who cares about you coming together to help you make the right decision. We all know Nana was getting forgetful. We all know you were spending too much time alone with her, influencing her decisions. It's time to do what's best for everyone." The family gathered on the front lawn like some twisted Norman Rockwell painting. Aunt Patricia stepped forward first. "Delphine, honey, we're worried about you. This inheritance, it's just too much responsibility for someone your age. You don't understand estate taxes, investment management, property maintenance. You'll lose it all within 5 years. Better to let someone with financial experience handle the assets," Uncle Robert added. "Camille has the education, the connections, the expertise to preserve the family wealth." I stood up from the porch swing and looked at each of them in turn. People who had barely acknowledged my existence for most of my adult life, now suddenly concerned about my well-being. "Where were all of you when Nana needed help?" I asked quietly. "We visited when we could," my mother said defensively. "When was the last time you saw her, Mom?" Silence. "Aunt Patricia, Uncle Robert, when did you last spend time with her?" More silence. "Rachel, you live 30 minutes away. When did you last call her?" My cousin looked at her shoes. "Great-Aunt Florence, I know you have mobility issues, but when did you last even send a card?" The elderly woman had the grace to look ashamed. "But you're all here now. All here to make sure the person who actually cared for her doesn't get to benefit from that care? All here to make sure the inheritance goes to someone who was too busy for 3 years to show up."
That's when the first car pulled up to the curb. A silver sedan with the local newspaper's logo on the side. Then a news van from Channel 7. Then another car I didn't recognize. Camille's face went white. What did you do? I hadn't done anything, but apparently someone else had. A woman in a business suit approached the group, a photographer trailing behind her. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Delphine Ashworth. I'm Jennifer Martinez from the Millfield Gazette. We received a very interesting tip about a story involving inheritance fraud and elder abuse allegations." My family shifted uncomfortably as more media arrived. The photographer was already taking pictures of our impromptu family gathering. "We understand there's been quite a bit of controversy about Mrs. Rosalind Ashworth's estate. We've been interviewing people around town who knew Mrs. Ashworth and her family. The story that's emerging is quite compelling." She pulled out a small recording device. "We spoke with Dr. Morrison, who treated Mrs. Ashworth until her death. He was very clear that she was mentally sharp until the end, and he was quite upset that someone had questioned his patient's competency. We also spoke with the staff at Millfield Bank, who remember you coming in with Mrs. Ashworth for various transactions. They said you always encouraged her to take her time, never pressured her, and often suggested she discuss major decisions with other family members first." Camille was backing toward her car, but Jennifer wasn't done. "We also spoke with several local businesses who've had interesting interactions with your sister this week. The real estate agent who was asked to list a house she didn't own, the catering company that was stiffed on a memorial reception, the car dealership where she tried to sell a vehicle that wasn't hers." Jennifer's eyes were bright with the thrill of a good story. "It paints a rather different picture than the elder abuse angle we were originally investigating." Behind Jennifer, I spotted a familiar figure climbing out of one of the cars. Beatrice Holloway, Nana's best friend, walking with purpose towards our group. "I called them," Beatrice announced, her voice carrying clearly across the lawn. "After Camille came to my house this afternoon asking me to lie about Rosalind's mental state, I decided this story needed to be told properly." The photographer's camera clicked rapidly as Beatrice continued. "Rosalind Ashworth was one of the sharpest women I've ever known, right up until her last day. She spent months planning her will because she wanted to make sure it reflected her true feelings about family loyalty. She told me that Delphine was the daughter she'd never had, and that watching her care for an old woman without expectation of reward had shown her what real love looked like."
More cars were arriving, neighbors drawn by the commotion, former colleagues from the library, people from around town who'd known Nana. A crowd was forming on the lawn of Willowbrook Manor, and at the center of it, Camille was realizing that her private family intervention had become a very public spectacle. Jennifer Martinez was interviewing Uncle Robert, who was stammering about family disagreements and private matters. The photographer was capturing every uncomfortable moment as my relatives tried to explain why they were pressuring me to give up an inheritance they'd had no hand in earning. That's when I saw the final car pull up. Jonathan Blackwell stepped out, briefcase in hand, his expression mixing amusement with professional concern. "Ms. Ashworth," he called out, approaching through the crowd, "I thought you should know we've received some interesting phone calls at the office today. It seems your sister has been telling people that she's hired counsel to contest the will. The problem is, she's been naming specific legal strategies and citing case law that she couldn't possibly know unless someone was feeding her information." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. "We did some checking. It turns out she's been getting advice from Harrison, Mitchell and Associates, a firm that specializes in inheritance disputes. The interesting thing is they require a $50,000 retainer for contested probate cases." $50,000 on top of the home equity loan, the vendor obligations, and all her other bad bets. As the cameras rolled and the questions flew, as my family stood exposed in the glare of public scrutiny,
I realized that this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about 29 years of being invisible finally coming to an end. The whole town was watching, and for the first time in my life, they were seeing me as the person who'd been there, who'd cared, who'd earned what I'd received. And they were seeing Camille exactly as she was, someone who'd mistaken entitlement for inheritance, and was now paying the price for that mistake in front of everyone who mattered. The newspaper article ran on the front page of the Millfield Gazette 3 days later. The headline read, "Local woman's devotion rewarded in estate dispute," with a photo of me sitting in Nana's garden beside the roses my father had planted. The article painted me as the selfless granddaughter who'd sacrificed everything to care for her elderly grandmother, while subtly highlighting Camille's various schemes to claim an inheritance that was never hers. By noon that day, I'd received 47 friend requests on Facebook, 12 LinkedIn connection invitations, and a voicemail from the Millfield Community Foundation asking if I'd consider joining their board of directors. But Camille wasn't ready to accept defeat. The first sign that she was escalating came at 6 a.m. on Thursday, when Jonathan Blackwell called, his usual professional composure strained. "Ms. Ashworth, I'm afraid we have a situation. Harrison, Mitchell and Associates filed a formal probate challenge yesterday evening just before the court deadline. They're alleging undue influence, mental incapacity, and..." He paused, clearly uncomfortable. "Fraud." My coffee grew cold in my hands. What kind of fraud? "They claim you forged documents, backdated legal papers, and manipulated your grandmother's medication to keep her compliant while you convinced her to change her will. It's completely baseless, but it's also very serious. These aren't just civil allegations. If proven, some of these charges could be criminal." Criminal. The word hit me like a physical blow. They're also requesting an immediate injunction to freeze all estate assets pending investigation. If granted, you wouldn't be able to access any of the inheritance, not the house, not the accounts, nothing, until the case is resolved. I sank into Nana's kitchen chair, the same chair where I'd read her letter just a week ago. How long could that take? These cases can drag on for years, especially if they keep filing motions and appeals. And, Miss Ashworth, Harrison, Mitchell and Associates doesn't come cheap. Someone is funding this legal assault with very serious money. After hanging up, I walked through Willowbrook Manor with new eyes. Every room, every piece of furniture, every family photograph could be taken away from me if Camille's lawyers succeeded. The house where I'd finally learned who I really was could become just another place I'd lost. My phone rang. It was my mother, her voice shaky. "Delphine, honey, you need to know something. Camille didn't just borrow against her house. She's been talking to investors, people who specialize in funding inheritance disputes. They front the legal costs in exchange for a percentage of the settlement." "What kind of percentage?" 40%. If she wins, they get 40% of whatever she recovers. Mom's voice cracked. "But if she loses, she's responsible for their costs too. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees." Hundreds of thousands? Camille had bet everything, her house, her future, her financial stability, on taking away what was rightfully mine. "There's something else. She's hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on you, someone named Frank Morrison who specializes in inheritance fraud cases. She's trying to prove you isolated Nana from the family, that you monitored her medications, that you controlled her finances in her final months." Every act of love I'd performed was being twisted into evidence of manipulation. Every time I'd picked up her prescriptions, every time I'd helped her pay bills when her hands shook too much to write checks, every time I'd spent the night when she was scared or lonely, all of it was being reframed as sinister control. The private investigator's work became apparent within days. He'd contacted everyone who'd ever interacted with Nana and me together, asking leading questions designed to plant seeds of doubt. The pharmacy technician called to warn me that someone had asked whether I'd ever picked up medications without Nana present. The bank teller mentioned that a man had inquired about whether I'd ever made transactions on Nana's behalf. Most disturbing was the call from Sarah, the home health aide who'd helped with Nana's physical therapy. Miss Ashworth, I wanted you to know that a man came to my house yesterday asking about your relationship with your grandmother. He wanted to know if I'd ever seen you give her medications, if you had ever seemed to influence her decisions, if she'd ever seemed afraid of you or reluctant to disagree with you. What did you tell him? The truth, that Mrs. Ashworth lit up every time you walked into the room, that she bragged about you constantly, worried that she was taking up too much of your time, that I had never seen a granddaughter more devoted to her grandmother's well-being. Sarah's voice hardened. But he kept pushing, asking if I'd testify that she seemed confused or dependent on you. When I said absolutely not, he offered me money. Money. They were trying to buy testimony against me. The investigation intensified over the following week. Frank Morrison had obtained Nana's medical records, her financial statements, even her phone records from the past year. He was building a timeline designed to show a pattern of increasing isolation and dependence that coincided with my greater involvement in her care. But his most devastating discovery came through social media forensics. He'd found every photo Camille had posted during family gatherings, every caption that mentioned Nana, every public display of granddaughter affection. Then, he'd cross-referenced those dates with Nana's medical appointments, her financial transactions, and my work schedule. The picture he painted was damning. While Camille was maintaining a public image as the loving granddaughter through social media posts, I was systematically taking control of Nana's life behind the scenes. Every family gathering Camille attended became evidence that she was the real granddaughter, maintaining normal family relationships, while every day I spent caring for Nana became proof of my manipulative isolation tactics. Jonathan called again on Friday evening, his voice grim. They've petitioned for an emergency hearing. Judge Whitman will review their injunction request Monday morning. If she grants it, you'll have to vacate Willowbrook Manor immediately, and all assets will be placed in court-controlled escrow. Can they do that? Unfortunately, yes. In cases involving allegations of fraud and undue influence, courts often err on the side of preservation. The theory is that it's better to freeze everything until the truth comes out than risk letting fraudulent transfers stand. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the house that might not be mine by the end of the week, touching the furniture my father had grown up with, looking at photos of family members I was just learning about. In the master bedroom closet, I found a box I'd somehow missed before, filled with report cards and school artwork bearing my father's name, proof of the childhood he'd lived in this very house. On Saturday morning, I discovered just how far Camille was willing to go. Mrs. Henderson from the flower shop called, her voice troubled. "Delphine, dear, I wanted you to know that your sister was here yesterday with a man in a suit. They were asking about the funeral arrangements, whether you'd seemed to be in charge of the decisions, whether your grandmother had seemed capable of making her own choices." She paused. But that wasn't the worst part. The man offered me $500 to sign a statement saying I'd been concerned about your influence over Rosalind. $500 to lie about my relationship with my own grandmother. "I threw them out of my shop," Mrs. Henderson continued, "but I'm worried about who else they might approach. Not everyone in town knows you as well as I do." By Sunday evening, I'd received calls from 6 different people who'd been approached with similar offers. The mailman, the pharmacist, even the teenage boy who'd helped me carry groceries to Nana's car on several occasions. Frank Morrison was systematically attempting to buy a case against me, offering cash payments for anyone willing to sign statements questioning my motives or Nana's mental state. But he'd made one crucial mistake. Millfield was a small town where people talked, and word was spreading about the private investigator who was trying to buy lies about the girl who'd devoted 3 years to caring for her dying grandmother. Instead of creating witnesses against me, he was creating a network of people who were increasingly offended by the attempt to destroy my reputation for money. As I prepared for Monday's hearing, I realized that Camille's desperate escalation had reached its peak. She'd hired expensive lawyers, borrowed against her house, brought in investors, employed a private investigator, and attempted to buy false testimony, all to take away an inheritance that had never belonged to her in the first place. But sometimes when you bet everything on a lie, the truth has a way of collecting compound interest. And Monday morning, that debt was about to come due. The courthouse was packed on Monday morning. I'd expected a quiet legal hearing, but news of the inheritance dispute had spread through Millfield like wildfire. Half the town seemed to be there, filling every seat in Judge Whitman's courtroom.
Camille arrived with an army. 3 lawyers in expensive suits, the private investigator, Frank Morrison, and several people I didn't recognize carrying briefcases and tablets. She looked confident, polished, ready for battle. I sat with Jonathan Blackwell, feeling small and underprepared. Judge Whitman, a stern woman in her 60s, called the hearing to order. We're here to consider an emergency petition for asset preservation in the matter of the Ashworth estate. Counsel for the petitioner may proceed. Harrison Mitchell himself stood up, a man I recognized from billboards around the city advertising his services for complex inheritance disputes. His voice boomed through the courtroom as he painted me as a master manipulator who'd isolated and controlled my vulnerable grandmother. Your Honor, the evidence will show a pattern of systematic isolation, financial manipulation, and psychological coercion spanning 3 years. Miss Delphine Ashworth used her position as caregiver to gradually separate Mrs. Ashworth from her legitimate family, control her medical decisions, and ultimately coerce her into rewriting her will. He presented a thick folder of evidence, bank records showing my involvement in Nana's finances, medical appointments I'd attended, even grocery receipts showing I'd purchased her medications. Every act of love transformed into something sinister through his presentation. Most concerning, Your Honor, is the testimony we've gathered suggesting Mrs. Ashworth's mental capacity was compromised in her final months, and that Miss Delphine Ashworth may have manipulated her medication schedule to maintain compliance. Several people in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably. I felt sick. Then, Harrison Mitchell called his first witness, Dr. Rebecca Thornton, a geriatric psychiatrist I'd never heard of. Dr. Thornton, based on your review of Mrs. Ashworth's medical records and the circumstances surrounding the will change, do you have concerns about her mental capacity? Yes, I do. The pattern of increasing dependency on one family member, combined with documented episodes of confusion and disorientation in her medical files, suggests possible cognitive impairment that could have affected her decision-making abilities. I grabbed Jonathan's arm. What documented episodes? Dr. Morrison said she was sharp until the end. Jonathan was already making notes furiously. Something wasn't right. The hearing continued for 2 hours, with Harrison Mitchell presenting witness after witness, painting me as a manipulative opportunist. But I noticed something odd. None of these people had actually known Nana personally. They were all experts, giving opinions based on secondhand information. When it was our turn, Jonathan stood slowly. Your Honor, before we present our defense, I'd like to call an unexpected witness who arrived this morning with information relevant to this case. Dr. James Morrison, Mrs. Ashworth's personal physician for the past 12 years. Dr. Morrison walked to the witness stand looking visibly angry. Dr. Morrison, Jonathan began, you've heard Dr. Thornton's testimony about documented episodes of confusion and disorientation in Mrs. Ashworth's medical files. Can you explain what she's referring to? I can, because I wrote those files, and Dr. Thornton is either incompetent or lying. There are no documented episodes of confusion or disorientation in Rosalind Ashworth's medical records. None. I have the complete file here with me. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Harrison Mitchell was on his feet instantly. Objection, Your Honor. This witness isn't properly prepared, and we haven't had time to review. Overruled, Judge Whitman said sharply. Continue, Dr. Morrison. Mrs. Ashworth was one of the most mentally acute patients I've ever treated. Her cognitive function tests were consistently normal, her medication compliance was excellent, and her decision-making capacity was never in question. He pulled out a thick folder. What Dr. Thornton described doesn't exist in any legitimate medical record. Jonathan approached the witness stand. Dr. Morrison, how do you explain Dr. Thornton's testimony? I can't.
unless she's working from falsified documents. But I can tell you something else that might be relevant. Last week, someone broke into my office. Nothing was stolen, but my filing cabinets were searched, and specifically, Mrs. Ashworth's medical files were disturbed. The courtroom erupted. Judge Whitman slammed her gavel for order. Furthermore, Dr. Morrison continued, yesterday I received a very unusual phone call from Harrison Mitchell's office. They offered to pay me $10,000 to amend my medical notes to indicate concerns about Mrs. Ashworth's cognitive state. When I refused and threatened to report them to the medical board, they suggested I might face a malpractice lawsuit if I didn't cooperate. Harrison Mitchell was having an urgent whispered conversation with his associates. Frank Morrison had gone pale. Jonathan wasn't done. Your Honor, we'd like to present evidence that this entire case is built on fabricated documents and purchased testimony. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. These are sworn affidavits from 12 residents of Millfield who were approached by the petitioner's investigator and offered money to sign false statements about Miss Ashworth and her grandmother. We also have bank records showing payments from Harrison Mitchell's trust account to individuals listed as expert witnesses in this case. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Mitchell, are you paying your witnesses? Your Honor, it's standard practice to compensate expert witnesses for their time. Is it standard practice to offer $10,000 bribes to doctors to falsify medical records? We never— Bailiff, Judge Whitman interrupted. Please contact the district attorney's office. We may have criminal matters to discuss.
But Jonathan wasn't finished. He called witness after witness. Real witnesses who had actually known Nana and me. Beatrice Holloway, who testified about Nana's clear mind and her specific instructions about the will. Sarah, the home health aide, who described my devoted care and Nana's obvious mental sharpness. Mrs. Henderson from the flower shop, who told the court about being offered money to lie. Each testimony painted the same picture: a devoted granddaughter caring for a mentally sharp grandmother who made deliberate, well-considered decisions about her estate. But the most damaging revelation came when Jonathan called Frank Morrison to the stand. Mr. Morrison, you're a private investigator hired by the petitioner, correct? Yes. Did you attempt to obtain false testimony against Miss Ashworth? Frank Morrison looked at his lawyers, then at Camille, then at the judge. Finally, he spoke. I was instructed to build a case showing undue influence by any means necessary. When legitimate witnesses wouldn't cooperate, I was told to find other ways. What other ways? Offering money for statements. Creating composite medical opinions from doctors who had never treated the patient. Building a narrative that would support the legal theory, even if it didn't reflect reality. The courtroom was dead silent. Mr. Morrison, who gave you these instructions? He pointed directly at Camille. She did. She said she didn't care what it cost or what we had to do. She was going to get what was rightfully hers. Camille was shaking her head frantically, but Jonathan had one more piece of evidence. Your Honor, we've also discovered that Miss Beaumont has been in contact with Harold Ashworth's surviving family members, people who never had any relationship with Rosalind Ashworth, but stand to benefit if her biological granddaughter is removed from the inheritance. He handed the judge a folder. These are documents showing that Harold's nephew, William Ashworth, has agreed to pay 40% of any inheritance Camille recovers to cover her legal costs. The same William Ashworth who contacted Harrison Mitchell's office initially and recommended their services. The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just about Camille's greed. It was about Harold's biological family trying to reclaim what they saw as their money through her. Judge Whitman stood, her face thunderous. Mr. Mitchell, your petition is not only denied, it's dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm ordering an immediate investigation into potential criminal charges, including attempted bribery, falsification of medical records, and conspiracy to commit fraud.
She turned to Camille. Miss Beaumont, you are hereby ordered to cease all interference with the Ashworth estate. Any further legal challenges will be considered harassment and may result in criminal charges. As the gavel came down, Camille's carefully constructed case collapsed like a house of cards. The lawyers were packing up quickly, the fake expert witnesses were heading for the exits, and Frank Morrison was being approached by court officers. But I barely noticed any of it, because sitting in the back of the courtroom, I'd spotted something that changed everything. A man in his 70s, with my father's eyes and my grandmother's nose, holding a manila envelope and watching the proceedings with intense interest. After everyone else had left, he approached me slowly. Miss Ashworth, my name is Charles Ashworth. I believe I'm your grandfather. Charles Ashworth had my father's gentle smile and hands that shook slightly as he opened the manila envelope. We sat in the courthouse lobby while the chaos of Camille's legal disaster played out around us, but I barely noticed the reporters or the lawyers hurrying past. All I could focus on was this man who claimed to be my grandfather, my real grandfather, not Harold, who had married into the family. I've been looking for you for 30 years, he said, his voice rough with emotion. When Thomas died, Harold convinced Rosalind to cut ties with my side of the family. He said it would be too painful, too confusing for everyone. I tried to fight it, but I was grieving too, and I didn't have money for lawyers. He pulled out a photograph from the envelope. My father as a young boy, maybe 8 years old, standing next to this same man beside a lake. They were both holding fishing poles and grinning at the camera. Thomas was my only child. When he died in that accident with your mother, you were all I had left of him. But Harold made it clear I wasn't welcome anymore. He had legal guardianship, and he threatened to move away with you if I didn't back off. His eyes filled with tears. I should have thought harder. I regret that every day. How did you find me? I've been keeping track from a distance all these years. I knew about Rosalind's passing, knew there would probably be estate issues. I hired an attorney to monitor the probate proceedings, not to interfere, just to stay informed. He smiled sadly. When I saw the newspaper article about the inheritance dispute, I knew I had to come forward. That picture of you in Rosalind's garden, you look exactly like your father at that age. He opened a second folder, thicker than the first. I've spent 30 years collecting everything I could about Thomas and your mother, Sarah. Letters, photographs, school records, medical records when you were born. Everything. Harold tried to erase. Page after page of my parents' life spread out between us. Their wedding album with pictures of both families celebrating together. My father's college transcripts showing his education degree. Letters he'd written to Charles about how excited he was to be a father. Medical records from my birth showing that Charles and his late wife Helen had been listed as emergency contacts.
There's something else, Charles said quietly. Something Rosalind probably never knew. He handed me a legal document dated 6 months before my parents' death. Thomas had just finished updating his will. He and Sarah had bought life insurance policies and set up a trust fund for you. The policies were supposed to pay out $400,000 each, and the trust was designed to cover your education and support until you turned 25. My hands trembled as I read the document. What happened to it? Harold claimed the policies were invalidated because of how the accident occurred. Some technicality about policy terms and circumstances of death. The insurance companies fought the claims for years, and eventually Harold settled for much smaller amounts. He said the legal fees had eaten up most of the money. Charles's expression hardened. But I hired an investigator recently. A real one, not like the man your sister employed. The insurance companies paid out in full, $800,000 plus accumulated interest. Harold deposited it into accounts that you should have inherited when you turned 25. $800,000, money that had been mine for 4 years, money I'd never known existed. Where is it now?
That's where this gets interesting. The money was invested in Harold's real estate business. When he died, it became part of his estate, which went to his biological children and grandchildren, including Camille's mother. Charles pulled out bank records. She's been living off your trust fund for 20 years. The courthouse lobby seemed to spin around me. Not only had Camille tried to steal Nana's inheritance, but she'd been benefiting from my stolen trust fund my entire adult life. Every designer purchase, every luxury vacation, every expensive car, funded by money that should have paid for my education, my apartment, my future. Can we get it back? With today's court decision and the criminal investigation that's been opened, absolutely. Harold's fraud has been exposed, and there's no statute of limitations on stolen trust funds. Charles smiled grimly. Your sister's legal troubles are just beginning. As if summoned by our conversation, Camille appeared in the lobby. She looked destroyed, her perfect composure shattered, her expensive clothes wrinkled, her face streaked with tears and makeup. Behind her trailed Harrison Mitchell, who was arguing urgently into his phone about damage control and potential criminal liability. She spotted us sitting together and approached with the desperate energy of someone whose world was collapsing. Delphine, we need to talk. This has gotten completely out of hand. I never meant for it to go this far. The lawyers, they told me we had a strong case. I was just trying to protect what Nana really wanted. I stood up slowly, Charles rising beside me. What Nana really wanted was for her actual granddaughter to inherit what belonged to her father's family. What you wanted was to steal from me twice. Once through Nana's will, and once through the trust fund you've been living off for 20 years. Camille's face went white. What are you talking about? Charles stepped forward. I'm talking about the $800,000 your grandfather stole from my granddaughter when she was a child. Money that's been supporting your family's lifestyle while she worked at the library and lived in a studio apartment. I don't know anything about... You don't know that your mother's house was purchased with Delphine's trust fund? You don't know that your college tuition came from money meant for her education? You don't know that every family vacation, every luxury you've enjoyed was funded by stealing from the girl you've spent 30 years treating like a charity case? Camille sank into a nearby chair, the full magnitude of her family's deception finally hitting her. I need to tell you something else, I said, sitting across from her. I'm not angry anymore. I was for a while. Angry about the inheritance, angry about the lies, angry about 30 years of being made to feel less than. But watching you destroy yourself these past 2 weeks, trying to steal from me, I realized something. She looked up, mascara streaking down her cheeks. You've been living a lie your whole life. Every achievement, every success, every advantage you had over me was built on stolen money and false premises. At least I earned my own way. At least I know who I really am now. Charles handed me a set of keys. Your father's house. The one he grew up in, the one he was going to bring you to before the accident. It's been sitting empty for 30 years, waiting for you. I looked at the keys, then at Camille, then at the courthouse around us where my real identity had finally been validated. You can contest this in court if you want. You can hire more lawyers, bring more fake witnesses, spend more money you don't have, but it won't change the truth. I'm Thomas Ashworth, Rosalind's true granddaughter, and Charles's only granddaughter. This is who I've always been, even when nobody acknowledged it. 3 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my father's house, my house now, making breakfast while morning light streamed through windows he'd looked through as a child. The trust fund had been recovered with interest, bringing the total to over $1 million. Willowbrook Manor had been sold to a young family who promised to tend Nana's rose garden. And Charles had moved to Millfield, finally able to be the grandfather he'd been denied the chance to be. Camille had been charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and was facing substantial legal bills and potential jail time. Her house was in foreclosure, her marriage was strained to the breaking point, and she'd been forced to declare bankruptcy.
But the strangest thing was I felt sorry for her. Not enough to help. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way. But sorry that she'd spent her whole life believing she was entitled to things that were never hers.
and that the reckoning had been so complete. I kept my job at the library, not because I had to anymore, but because I loved it. I used part of the trust fund to expand the literacy program and create a scholarship fund for local students who needed help with college expenses. And every evening, I sat in my garden with Charles, listening to stories about my father while we tended the vegetables he'd taught me to grow. Finally surrounded by people who loved me, not for what I could provide, but for who I actually was. The girl who'd spent 30 years apologizing for taking up space had finally found her place in the world. And it turned out there had always been room for her at the table. She just needed to stop asking permission to sit down. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.